Hi, everyone. Reinette Senum here, California Gubernatorial candidate 2022. I would like to share with you what I've been saying on the campaign trail. I've been out campaigning for many months now, and I've had numerous people come up to me and saying, "Hey, could you put online what you've been sharing with us today?" So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I suggest that once you listen to this video, if it resonates, send it out widely. So, as I said, my name is Reinette Senum, and I come from a small town in Northern California called Nevada City. And it is just northwest of Sacramento, not too far away from Lake Tahoe. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share with all of you a little bit about what I've been doing over the years, and then we're going to go back about a century, and we're going to fast forward to now and talk about our future. So I am a two-time mayor and a two-time vice mayor and city council member. It was in 2004 I began to become very involved in community work. And I was very concerned at the time about the state of the planet. Of course, now 2004 looks like the good old days. But I really wanted to focus on resiliency. And being that I was concerned about the planet, I thought to myself, what can I possibly do? I'm one person. And then I realized, well, what you can do is you can just take care of your own community, make it the best it can be. And the objective was to make it such a beautiful, strong community that people come into this town going, oh, this is what a sense of place is like. This is what a community is like. And that's what I decided to do. So I originally helped co-found an organization called APPLE, Alliance for a Post-Petroleum Local Economy, that really looked at the our connections to oil and how dependent upon we were on it, and we still are, and really just kind of work on our local resiliency as far as mom and pop businesses and expanding our food network and so on, and even having a time bank. So I started working on these things. I opened up the first organic farmers market in Nevada County, made sure we had on all of our municipally owned buildings, we had solar panels. We had we started a green efficiency, a sustainability center, so people can see how to make buildings more energy efficient. Started the first extreme weather shelter for the homeless, and started a time bank, and just did all these things for about 4 good years as a city council member. And that was from 2008 to 12. And when I got originally elected in 2008, I got the most votes in the history of Nevada City, about 82% of the votes. And so those first 4 years were quite fantastic. It was a lot of being proactive and going out there and creating the community we wanted to see. And then it was actually about a 4-year break, but I was still highly involved and still very engaged in my community, but I just wasn't on the city council. That was around 2016. I decided to run again. Was just looking at some of the city politics, and I was also really keeping an eye on what was called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which was really a big concern of mine. And already at that point in time, around 2015-16, I could see there's a lot more encroachment and threats coming our way. So I decided to run for my second term, and I won. And interestingly enough, it was during that little 4-year break that the world changed a lot. Because the first 4 years I was on the council, it was a lot of being proactive and really trying to be more resilient and really try to demonstrate what a community can do and build our networks. And then by the time I was back on the city council from 2016 to 20, it was less being proactive and really a lot more of being on the defense. And what I mean by that was it was soon after I was on the council that Paradise burned down, not very far from us here in California, in Northern California, in Nevada City. And we had a rising number of homeless population. We, of course, then had homeowners insurance policy cancellations left and right because people could not afford, because we're in a fire-prone area. Then we had Pacific Gas and Electric outages. Some of them went on for days and actually caused a lot of people to have to shut their businesses permanently. And then, of course, while I was mayor, C-19 hit. And it was during this time that I was already well established that things were getting a lot rougher for our community and for our city, and that we're going into more precarious times. And of course, then the C-19 hit. And it was in the beginning, around January, that I actually started to notice it in China. And I was very concerned by how slow the city and the county were moving on this. According to Johns Hopkins University, it was going to be very virulent and double every 5.5 to 6 days. And I thought, well, if that's the case, or 5 to 6.5 days, if that was the case, that means the whole planet was going to be consumed by the end of April. So I was concerned, didn't know what we had beyond predictive models. I signed a declaration of emergency as the mayor. And then at that point in time, Newsom gave his stay-at-home orders. I supported it for a couple of weeks because I was like, we don't know, we don't have the information. Let's be uber conservative. And then we came out of that. And interestingly enough, I was saying in these now private Zoom calls with county and city heads and county public officials, health officials, and so on. We were just going off of predictive models. And in our conversations on these weekly Zoom calls and every Friday, I said, well, okay, that's fine. Let's go off these predictive models. But once we get the real data in, then we can adjust ourselves accordingly. But what was really very interesting to me was that the data began to come in and it looked good. It didn't look so bad. And what was disconcerting to me was that we were on the exact same trajectory. We weren't adjusting ourselves according to the new information. So I began to ask questions such as, what's the goal here? What's the measurement? What are we shooting for? Other questions I'd ask is, exactly how many cases do we need? And I was ultimately either muted during these Zoom calls with county officials, or I was ignored, or I was basically told, why don't you wait till the meeting's done and you can ask more of those blades in the grass questions, which generally meant I was asking more than 2 questions. One of the answers I did receive as far as like, what's the metrics? What are we shooting for? Was like, well, Reinette, not until we get 0 cases. That was one of our local doctors telling me this on our county Zoom call. And I said, 0 cases. When do we ever get 0 cases of anything? That didn't seem realistic. I was then immediately told, well, Reinette, your county has very low herd immunity. And basically what that meant was that we had low jab rate. And so it was at this time, and this is getting into like late spring, that I could see something else was going on. And I just won my 3rd election to the city council. And now it was June, and Governor Newsom made his statewide mask mandate, which was really kind of interesting. We were being told that basically we were being forced into this. It was the law and so on. And a law is not a mandate and vice versa. So I actually walked right down to City Hall to our police chief, Chad. And I said, Chad, do you intend on enforcing this mask mandate? And he said to me, oh, I don't know how. There's no penal code for it. And I can't enforce something that doesn't have a penal code. I said, okay. And then he said, and also he goes, it doesn't look all that constitutional to me. I'm like, thank you very much. That's what I thought. So I did the only thing I could really do at that point in time. I was looking across the whole entire state, waiting for the backlash, waiting for people to speak up about a governor does not have unilateral power to make these type of decisions. There's a process. And so I was met with silence. I wasn't seeing the media really covering this. I wasn't seeing elected officials around the state speaking up against this, saying a governor does not have the authority to do this. I was really concerned by that. So I did the only thing I could do. I just thought, okay, I'll just have to resort to my Facebook again, my Facebook page. And so I grabbed a Peggy Hall, the Healthy American video. She did a beautiful job demonstrating how legislation goes through and how a bill is made. And with that, I did a very bold post, and I did that by design to get attention because I knew what was going on was not really legal. And that was basically, and this is quite paraphrased, regarding the mask mandate, as you go about your day, do know that Newsom is not king, he cannot make laws, and you can breathe freely. And as you can well imagine, all hell broke out. Of course, all the news from Sacramento was here at our doorstep, and LA Times and SF Gate and SACB were saying, oh, mayor says, you don't need to wear your mask, they don't work. And I said, no, I'm not talking about the efficacy of the masks. What I'm doing is I'm talking about the fact that this is overreach by our governor and that he doesn't have this authority. And this is actually a very slippery slope. So we got through that, and we had people in the community saying, we love Reinette, we hate her, no, we love her, we hate her, back and forth. And poor City Hall's in the middle, of course, taking the arrows left and right. It's a very tiny town, so you can well imagine how intense it could be. And so we get through that, and now we're in July, and I'm ready to step down as mayor and take my oath for the 3rd time. And by this time, I realized that what I was seeing was quite disturbing, and I was not in any way, shape, or form going to be quiet, that I was going to continue to speak up. So rather than giving my resignation or giving my oath once again to the U.S. and California Constitution, I actually gave my resignation. And when I read my resignation, the city was quite surprised. I didn't know that was coming. And I basically ended it with a story of a Dr. Leonard Hardell, who is well known for basically convincing the World Health Organization that Agent Orange is a cancer-causing agent. And once he did that, he went to all the different heads of the chemical companies and said, hey, stop spraying. And when they didn't, they hauled them into international court for crimes against humanity. And I said the most important thing to remember is in order to determine whether or not somebody's committing a crime against humanity, there's only one question and one question only that needs to be asked. And that question is, what did you know by when? So I said to my city council members and the other county officials, you have enough information right now to know better. I've got this information available to me. I can see what's going on. You should know better. And I said, I'm going to come back and I'm going to hold your feet to the fire to the highest extent of the law, because you're committing crimes against humanity. And I said, at this point in time, I've decided to step down, to step up. Don't know exactly what that means, but I'm going to do it. And I say my goodbyes. And I stepped away from this town that I've been investing in for almost 20 years, for good 18 years. And it was a big thing for me. But I realized that at this point in time, I had to step out of the sandbox and step into a completely different sandbox in order to assist this community, assist this planet, and actually make the difference I need to make. So with that, I thought, well, now what do I do? From what I could tell at that perspective at that time, people weren't getting the information they needed to make a real educated decision around our health and the jabs and so on, or upcoming jabs. And the information around therapies was also being censored. So I thought, look, I'm going to start something. And I started a little YouTube video. I had a couple different iterations for names, but ultimately I settled on Reinette Senum's Chew on This. And I started to interview experts in the respective fields to basically bring this information that I was not seeing at the time. It was very quiet. This is early summer of 2020, and there was not a lot of contradictory information out there from major media and what Fauci was saying and who and so on. And yet I was meeting doctors all across the country and talking with them who were being very successful with their therapies. And making sure people didn't die. So I started interviewing all these different experts who are quite well known today. And what most people don't realize is that elected officials, it's their job to keep their constituents informed. It's their job to educate them and give them the information that they otherwise may not get, so they can be informed and they can make informed decisions. So I did this show, I did a couple interviews every week or so, and with great success. And then YouTube took me down when I had some videos go viral, and I had to go move over to BitChute. And then finally I was on the High Wire, Del Bigtree's The High Wire. And I had a lot of people around the state saying, hey, you should run for governor, you should run for governor. And my response to that was absolutely not. I'm not running for governor. But I continued to have this conversation. And over a course of 2 months with my partner, Susan, of now 14 years, we started talking, well, what do we do? Do we just, continue test driving RVs and run off in the sunset? Or do I run? And I tried to imagine myself riding off in the sunset in an RV, and I couldn't quite imagine looking back and watching California burn and not do something about it. So the folks I was talking to, I said, look, at this idea about running for governor, I have no intention of ever running for governor. I just won my city council and was going to be on the city council for another, 4 years, but let's talk about it. I said, this is how I feel. If I were to run for governor, these would be the two most important caveats. If you want to do just more of the same campaign, you got other people for that. But really, if you want to do something extraordinary that's never been done before, I'm interested. First and foremost, I'd have to run with no party affiliation whatsoever. I know the kind of challenge that comes with. There's very little infrastructure and momentum because of that. But it allows me to actually represent the people. And as it currently stands with the 2010 Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United versus FEC, big money has infiltrated the campaign world and elections. And it's really impossible to actually serve a people and serve a party simultaneously. So I want to go with no party affiliation. I have to serve the people and the planet. Next important thing is, as an activist, as a person who's been in the trenches for almost 20 years, done all this wonderful work, and yet I see our community and I see the world backsliding more and more. So, I want us to have a foundation to this campaign that supersedes election cycles and supersedes politics. And what I'm talking about is the seventh generation principle. This is something that I became familiar with many, many years ago in my environmental, work. And then I became more aware of it as actually being from the indigenous people of Turtle Island. And understanding this is an important component to our own well-being. And what I meant by that is the Constitution, what most people don't know, was inspired by the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. Our forefathers were so inspired they decided to build this whole framework of this new nation, America, based upon the indigenous people. But what's really interesting is, for whatever reason, this beautiful vessel known as the Constitution, well, every vessel should have an anchor and a compass, and that wasn't included in our Constitution. And that compass being that seventh generation principle. Every decision you make today should serve 7 generations from now. That is the guiding light That is the shore we always head towards, right? And we measure ourselves and our leaders by. The compass, or sorry, the anchor is the elders. We include them in the decision making. We make sure that we're making these decisions. They look back at the last few generations and they can actually, fold in that intelligence and that wisdom to ensure for the next 7 generations. That anchor and that compass is what actually ensures the success of this vessel, the Constitution, getting to the shore of its desire. And so I said, if we can have a campaign about this, the 7 generation principle, and that be throughout the whole entire campaign, I'm game. Anything less, I have no interest. There's plenty of other people out there to just run a normal campaign. So I got the okay from a group of people and friends and even people on Instagram were kind of circling around me, and we started working on this. And one of the first things we began to work on in October of 2020, actually, because I was thinking about originally running for the recall and decided not to do that later on. But in 2020, we actually read Newt Gingrich's Contract with Americans, and rapper Ice Cube, Contract with Black Americans. Read both of those, and then we looked at California and said, okay, how do we do this for California? And what we ultimately did is we looked at the biggest threats that's facing California, the biggest threats, and we did this incredible Aikido move and say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to focus our economy on restoration and healing, because we need that now more than ever to restore and to heal what we've been through, not only collectively over the last 2 years, but really for generations. And so the objective was to look at the biggest threats facing us, turn them into our biggest opportunities, and build these economies on healing and restoration, which starts with rebuilding our topsoil, right? Rebuilding our pollinator population, expanding regenerative farming, ensuring our legacy farms and ranchers and so on are here for generations to come, making sure they have intelligent and fair and transparent water allocation, right? Utilizing community gardens in neighborhoods, in nursing homes, and in schools, right? As a method to bring people together, to drop the caustic words, to drop the weapons, to drop the divisiveness, and actually focus on growing our food and making that intergenerational. And ultimately, the beauty about this is that you drop all those differences, you focus on the task at hand, and then you get to actually enjoy the bounty of your labor, sit around tables, break bread, commune, right? And heal, because that's what we need more than anything. And so that's very much in a nutshell of this contract with Californians. And there's ways that we can invest in ourselves instantaneously here in California, get the mom and pop businesses going again, get the small, medium, large size industrial manufacturing businesses going again, and really invest in local and regional communities as well as authority, keeping the local authority intact as well. And I do tell people, like, look at this is an amazing time to be alive, and look at this is really great to be running for governor. But you have to understand that this is not a one-person job, that this is all hands on deck. We need everybody right now. So we're talking, we want people to run at the grassroots level for the school boards, the city, the county, the state, the federal level. Does not matter your party affiliation. What we want you to do is run with that 7 generation principle as your mechanism for decision making, to look through that lens. Okay, so you can come from any perspective politically, but just always think about the 7th generation. Does this serve them? And that's our guiding light. That's how we measure our leaders and their decision making by. And the other piece is that, okay, maybe you don't want to run for an elected position, totally understand, but can you start making decisions based upon that 7 generation principle? Whether you're a doctor, a parent, a garbage man, a police officer, a veteran, a store owner, can you make decisions based upon the 7 generation principle? And I use 2 examples of what that would look like. First and foremost, let's say you're a farmer and you have your crop and some weeds in the road and you want to spray the weeds. Do you spray with Roundup or do you spray with white vinegar? What better serves the 7th generation? Let's say, for instance, you have some food to go. Do you put that in a one-use styrofoam container, or do you put that in a stainless steel multi-use container? What better serves the 7th generation? And what's beautiful about this is that we're not looking for perfection. It doesn't have to be 100%, participation. It's not my business to micromanage you or vice versa. And what it does is it allows us to actually lead in our own lives the best we can. And again, I don't need to micromanage you. You could be over here heading towards that shore there, or I could be over here. Well, you tack back and forth, find your route to that shore as best you can. And so this allows the government not to have to micromanage our lives, not to have, them levy fees and fines and red tape and taxes and more taxes on us. We just do the best thing we can according to the 7th-generation principle. And what most people don't want us to know, and legislators, I should say, is they don't want us to know how powerful we really are. They want us to believe that our destiny is in the hands of their legislation and policy, and that's not true. You and I make 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and many of those thoughts are connected to actions. Now, just imagine for one moment, if you have over time, instead of going this way, right, because of our decisions we make over and over and over again every day, that you have millions and millions of people making decisions based upon that 7th-generation principle. And again, doesn't have to be 100%, doesn't have to be all the time, but over time, we'll end up way over here instead of over here, because of all those little tiny decisions that add up over and over and over and over again. They get us somewhere. And our elected officials don't want us to realize how much control and power we have in our hands, right, to lead ourselves into whatever future of our desire. So I'm going to stop right there for one moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go way back into a little bit of a backstory here to also help you kind of better understand how I function and what I do and show up in this world as a leader. And I'm going to give you a very truncated story here about my history so you can better understand my leadership style. First and foremost, I want to say that, I was adopted as a young woman, very grateful that I was adopted, very, very grateful that I was born. And I was adopted at 2 months old. And when I was 11 years old, I finally had a great aunt come over from my adoptive family from England. And she actually had the family tree that went back about 900 years. It was staggering. And I was so enamored with this. I just ate it up until I realized that it wasn't my blood. It wasn't my natural birth family. So I looked to my adoptive mother and I asked, when can I find this out myself? And she said, oh, no, you'll never know. That's illegal. At the time, you couldn't find out who your birth parents were, and our files were closed and sealed. So as the world would have it, the very next day, there was a newspaper article about adoptees looking for their natural families, their birth parents. And I wrote off to 5 different organizations saying, would you please help me find my mother? And within a week, they all wrote back saying, according to the information you've given us, I was 11 years old at the time, you're plenty young, your mother's young, don't worry, you have time, and legally there's nothing we can do for you until you're 18 years old. Well, they didn't know it, I didn't know it, but my birth mother was actually very sick at that time with breast cancer and would die about a year later at the age of 35. My adoptive mother at that time would be very upset. She would let me know my name was Marcella Anderson, which is actually the wrong last name. And then my adoptive mother also died when I was about 19 years old. And for almost 20 years, I went on this wild goose chase looking for the Andersons. And I tell people I always had this childhood fantasy of driving up and down I-5 in the iconic pea soup Anderson that has a big windmill. I always imagine myself walking in there and seeing my family, all these people carrying pea soup, bowls of pea soup and looking just like me and me saying, Mom, Dad, So that was my imagination. And then I was finally in my 20s and I couldn't find them. I couldn't find my natural family. It's like they completely disappeared. So I thought at this point in time, well, then all you can do is just go out there, and you're never going to find them, obviously. Just they're gone. Don't know what happened. Just go out there and see what you're made of. And so by this time, I'd been training with the South Pole expedition, men and women who went to the South Pole without me. And then I organized my own American Women's Trans-Antarctic Expedition. And ends up that these women went to the South Pole and I did not go. And so finally I thought, you know what? Why don't you just go out there, see what you're made of, and go cross something really cold. So I grabbed a globe and I looked at Siberia, I looked at Greenland, and finally I decided to cross Alaska. And so this very truncated version of this story, I ended up going commercial fishing up in Kodiak Island. I walked the docks until I got a job on the Big Valley, which I would see about 12 years later actually sink on a show called The Deadliest Catch with my captain, Gary Edwards, and 4 other crew members. They perished, sadly. I saved up enough money at that time to go to Homer, Alaska afterwards, where I started to train and get my gear together to cross Alaska by myself in the dead of winter. And I had a neighbor by the name of Jack Berry, who was an Iditarod dog sled racer. And so I became his dog handler, started training dogs, had a team of like 12 dogs or so. And I told him about my dream of crossing Alaska. And I was shy to do this because when the commercial fishermen found out I was going to cross their last frontier, all hell broke out. They basically said some greenhorn California chick from, from this neck of the woods is not going to cross their last frontier. And so once I got off the boats, I was really ready to be out in the woods for a while. So I started training dogs with Jack. I told him about my dream to attach 2 dogs to my waist, and I was going to have them pull me in my sled that I was going to haul behind me down the frozen Yukon River across Alaska. And he said, well, I got 2 dogs, they're retired, but they can pull you across the state. They're Iditarod, sled dogs. So I started training them 12 to 25 miles a day, 5 days a week. And 5 days before I was to leave, Jack came up and said, I don't think you can do it. In fact, I think you're going to die before you make the first 100 miles. So he said to me, I'm taking the dogs back. And he walked away with the dogs. And I'm sure he thought, oh, she'll never go now. She doesn't have her dogs. Who's going to help her pull the sled? And so I did the only thing I could do. And I yelled at him. I just simply said, fine, I'll pull the sled myself. And 5 days later at 55 below, I was pulling that sled by myself in the dead of winter. So I'm sure he thought that I wasn't going to go without them, but there I was. And so I flew to Eagle, Alaska, on the Canadian-Alaskan border. And I ultimately ended up skiing 200 miles. My eyelashes froze off. And as I said, it was 55 below, and it was extraordinarily intense. And I got 200 miles into the trip, and I realized I could handle the cold, but it was the loneliness that was really, really hard. And then finally I met another trapper in a place called Circle. And he said, well, I'm going to be shooting, killing 2 sled dogs. If you want one or all of them, take them. And so ultimately I ended up taking 1 dog by the name of Diamond, and he could barely pull me a mile the first day. And we trained for 2 weeks, and they were off down the river once again. And boy, in no time at all, we were covering about 60 miles a day. I couldn't believe it. And ultimately I'm halfway across the state, and the most horrifying thing happened. I looked down and I see that this frozen river, which was my only road, was now melting ahead of schedule. And there was this water above the ice. And ultimately I realized, oh no, the only road I know is melting, and I have no other way to continue. So at that point in time, I realized this is what I can do. I have 2 options. I give up, or I find a different way to continue. So I stayed in a little Athabascan village just right by the Arctic Circle called Stevens Village. And the villagers, locals, are very kind to clean out a little cabin, a log cabin next to the bank of the Yukon River. And as I'm walking in and out my door every day going, what do I do? Do I give up? Do I come back and, just return next year and pick up where I ended? Or what do I do? And I really felt like I had no options. But as I'm saying this, walking in and out of my door, I see the snowbank melt. And there's this little green thing protruding out of the snowbank. And finally it's sticking out, and I'm looking at that going, what in the world is that thing? So I start digging out, and I dig and unbury the last canoe built in this village 20 years before. And I think to myself, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build myself a canoe. It was too dilapidated. It wasn't going to go anywhere. So I'm like, I'll build a canoe. So I go to all the elders and I say, I'm going to build a canoe. All I need are some tools. And I tell them this. And the next day word gets to me like, no, women do not build canoes here. And so I had to go back to them and say, no, you don't understand. Where I come from in California, that's what women do. We're canoe builders. And I'm sure there's a couple female canoe builders somewhere in California, but they didn't know how to react to that. But they ended up giving me some tools, lending me some tools. And so I went out and cut 3 trees as I was told to do. And I dragged them back in. I hauled them in. And the next day, Herb, big-bellied Athabascan, missing a front tooth, has been obviously elected to have a fatherly talk with me. And he sits next to me on the logs as we overlook the Yukon. And he says to me, we call you Wonder Woman because of all the miles you can ski in a day, but you build this canoe and we're going to call you Fruitcake. So I rip these 18-foot long planks of wood. I start to strip them down. And as I do that, they're passing by and they're going, Fruitcake. They're waving at me. And the kids are emulating this, saying Fruitcake, of course. And I'm hand planing 5 days a week over and over. It becomes a meditation. And what really struck me is the children came up to me at one point, and when they first started starting this, they asked me, they said, well, what are you doing? And I looked at them and I said, well, I'm building a canoe like you guys have done for hundreds or thousands of years. And I realized what I was witnessing right then and there was a break in their culture, that the knowledge and the wisdom and the skills was not being passed on to the children. There was a rejection of the culture, and it was heartbreaking. Right. And I understand that when you lose that kind of root to all that became before, that all came before, that it's it's much more difficult to navigate. And I knew as an adopted person that by me not having my roots, it was much more difficult for me to know what my coordinates was. Like, where am I? Where am I coming from and where am I going? And interestingly enough, when we see those breaks in the culture, many times you'll see depression and loneliness and isolation and drug addiction, alcoholism and suicide and death. And I understand how that connection to the ancestors and all that came before is so, so critical to our overall well-being. So I would spend some time with the children, and they would hand plane and I would hand plane, and they'd relearn their skills and I would learn these skills, how to make a canoe. And then the most beautiful thing happened is after them saying, hey, fruitcake, after 2.5 weeks of hand planing, I'd taken all the long planks of wood I submerged in the local muskrat pond. I laid them at my feet and I began to assemble these beautiful ribs and the railing and so on. And the most beautiful insight happened because of this. They stopped coming by saying, hey, fruitcake. And instead, as they saw me assemble this boat, they said, I got a C-clamp if you need a C-clamp for that. And then someone else came by saying, hey, I got some galvanized screws if you need some. And then someone else came by saying, I got some oil-based marine paint. You like blue and red. And it was that insight into our humanity that has shifted how I lead and understanding how we are as a species and what motivates us. And I realized that people generally have to see you actually doing something, and they see something like that is inspiring, that is exciting, that is new, that is taking you somewhere. They want to be part of that. They want to jump on that canoe. They want to go downriver with you on that boat. And that's been my style of leadership everywhere and ever since. So built this canoe in 3.5 weeks, paddled it 900 miles in 11 days with very little current, averaged 75 miles a day. And I completed my 1,500 mile trip, 4 months, 6 days, and I filmed it for National Geographic. I thought the trip and the journey was over. And little did I know, I'm now 30 years old, and it's been 2 years since my trip, and I decided that this is the time I'm going to find my natural family. And I find my mother. And I find that she actually died just after I began looking for her originally when I was 11 years old. And I was just devastated. Her name was Jane Funston. And that's when I found out my name was really Marcella Funston, not Miss Marcella Anderson. And so she gave birth to a half brother of mine 4.5 years after I was born. And we tracked each other down for the first time. And I was born in San Francisco. And my brother and I are talking about this wild great grandfather we have named General Frederick Funston. And if you go to San Francisco, there's a Fort Funston and a Funston Avenue and stuff, very well known. And so we're talking about our lives. I give a little synopsis of my crossing Alaska trip. And my half brother says to me, he goes, "No, Reinette," he goes, "this was after you found out our great grandfather did this, right?" And I look at him, I said, no, I said, "I think you're mixed up. I'm talking about Alaska." He said, no. Our great grandfather, he did a trip across Alaska. And there's a Smithsonian May 89 edition that talks all about his life and about this trip. So I'm living in Los Angeles, right down from UCLA. And within a half hour's time, I have that Smithsonian magazine article in my hands, and my life is completely about ready to change. And so I look at this magazine, and the first thing I see is my great grandfather had been hired by the USDA to go up to Alaska to collect botanical samples. He did not have the luxury that I had of flying into the headwaters of the Yukon. His trip was 2 years long, mine was 4. But I note, oh, look at that. His trip has started on April 10th, my birthday. That's amazing. And then I continue to read. And it says, oh, he snowshoed down the frozen Yukon River, and along the way, he shot and killed a sled dog to eat because he was starving. And I think to myself, that's crazy, because I skied down the frozen Yukon River, and I actually saved a sled dog from being shot and killed and used him as my companion. And then my great-grandfather with 2 buddies cut down 3 trees, and they built an 18-foot-long canoe. And I think to myself, that's crazy. I cut down 3 trees and I built an 18-foot-long canoe. And then my great-grandfather paddled down the rest of the Yukon River. And along the way in the Delta, where it gets really, really quite rough near the Bering Sea, he flipped his canoe and lost a lot of his botanical samples and photos. Not all, but a lot. Well, when I built my canoe, I put little stabilizers on them, and they completely saved my life. And so I didn't flip over whatsoever, but he did his trip. And it was a total of 1,500 miles on the Yukon River. Mine was a total of 1,500 miles. He, of course, ended up going and doing his trip in 1894. And I did my trip in 1994. He was 27 and turned 28 along the way. And I was 27 and I turned 28 along the way. And I'm thinking to myself, as I'm seeing this, right? This is mathematically impossible. I kept rereading the story over and over again in the Smithsonian. Like, this is mathematically impossible. How can this be? And then it dawned on me, obviously, I need to look into Fred Funston. Who is this guy? So to give you a short version here, General Frederick Funston, at the time of his death, was the highest ranked military official in the country. He had Patton and Pershing and Dwight D. Eisenhower and MacArthur under his command. He was actually overseeing Pershing as he hadn't pursued Pancho Villa when he dropped dead of a massive heart attack at the age of 52 and put the whole entire nation into shock. He was supposed to lead us into what was known at the time as the Great War, later known as World War I. So he dies. They put Pershing into his place to head us into World War I. And my great-grandfather, for the most part, just kind of disappeared into the shadows of the heroes of World War I. But what did he leave behind? Well, interestingly enough, it was before his death in 1917. It was in 1906 where he was second in command of the Presidio in San Francisco. And the first in command actually left the night before to go off to a wedding to the East Coast on a train. And the next morning, my great-grandfather was shaken out of bed because the 1906 earthquake had just struck. So Frederick Funston runs up in his skivvies all the way to Nob Hill, turns around, looks and sees a whole entire city engulfed in flames. He runs back down. God bless his wife. This earthquake has just hit, but she manages to hand him a cup of coffee. And he takes the coffee and says to his wife, "Pack the belongings into the trunks. The house will be burning down today." And within about 5 hours, that house burned down. My great-grandfather then ordered every single tent and blanket west of the Mississippi, set up refugee camps over in the Berkeley, Oakland area for the survivors of the earthquake, then declared martial law. And then he also ended up taking all this dynamite and creating a fire break along Van Ness Boulevard. It was a very controversial act. People to this day say, "Oh, he used the wrong type of fire not fireworks, but of dynamite." And I'm thinking to myself, he probably used whatever kind of dynamite he could get his hands on at the time. But when you look at the maps of the Inferno right along Van Ness Boulevard, he did stop the fire at its tracks. It did continue on the flanks, but he saved a big portion of San Francisco. And he was actually known later on as the man who saved San Francisco. But what's really most interesting is this, and this is why my campaign is all about legacy and what we leave behind. After the dust settled, the homeowners of these beautiful homes my great-grandfather and his soldiers blew up, they tried to sue him and the U.S. Army, and they lost. And out of it came a ruling known as eminent domain for the larger good. And I've seen over the years, like many, many Californians and Americans, eminent domain actually be weaponized and used against people. Total misuse many times. And I'm thinking to myself, God, do you know how many times I personally have fought against eminent domain and have been on the front lines pushing back? And all of a sudden it really dawns on me about legacy and what we leave behind. And all of a sudden I realize that we never, ever talk about what we're leaving behind for those who are yet walking on this planet. And little did my great-grandfather know that over 100 years later, that his great-granddaughter would be having to deal with his actions. That's what this whole entire campaign is about, is what are we leaving behind? And after seeing so much division over the years, so much hatred and vitriol, it breaks my heart. And I realize the only thing we can do right now is focus on the future, not argue, not debate, not convince one or the other who's right or who's wrong, but to focus on the future and to look back, because that is what Fred Funston has taught me, is to look back in order to see where we need to go in the future. And so when I look back to my great-grandfather, General Frederick Funston, I look back even further, and that's when I look at the Constitution, and I realized that we were missing this important component of it, and that was the anchor and the compass, that seventh generation principle. And I want to be very clear about this. This is not an ordinary campaign. It does supersede politics, and it does supersede election cycles. What we're really looking at is creating a cultural shift within Californians and how we show up in our own communities, in our own lives, and in our own leadership. And to take reign, right? Take hold of that wheel and ensure that we're actually going the direction that we want to go. So with that, I simply want to say, if you want to find out more about me, if you want to see more of the historic photographs or video or footage, you can go to electreinette.com, ElectReinette.com. You can also go to thefoghornexpress.com. It's a personal website and blog. And you can check out my Alaska story there as well. But I've had people along the campaign trail, Reinette, they say, what can we possibly do for you? They ask, how can we support you? And first and foremost, these are the most important things. Word of mouth. The censorship is unreal. We are just under 7 weeks away from ballots going out here in California, and the news is barely covering that we have the ability to actually go out there and change the course of history in California and actually vote for somebody who's going to represent the people and the planet and not a party. The other thing is that we do need to have as many donations as possible. We do not come with big bucks or deep pockets. We're as grassroots as you can be. We have to stay grassroots so we can represent you and not big money and a corrupt party. The other thing is talk this up everywhere you go. Share this link, share this video. When you're at the grocery store, when you're at the gas station, right? When you're just walking through the neighborhoods, bring up this campaign, bring up ElectReinette.com, bring up the 7th generation principle, and spread the word. Again, this goes beyond politics. This is about a cultural shift, and this is about our future. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, please pass this on. Bye.